So you've got yourself a cheap Nintendo handheld from eBay, a Game Boy Advance, a Nintendo DS, and you might be thinking, when am I going to get to do some of this? Well, you've got a number of options, and I'm going to run through them all now for you, just so you don't have to. Let's start right at the beginning. A conversion of the original Street Fighter 2 for the original Game Boy. So this will work on the original Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance SP, but not the Game Boy Micro or the DS. Don't even think about that. That'll be terrible. You could waste up to £6. That's what this cost me. Let's hope it's worth every penny. Let's see what it can do. Okay, that was one of the worst experiences of my life. I'm not sure who greenlit that project, but it was just, I mean, who thought that that was going to work anyway? I mean, it was better than I expected, but, well, it was terrible. So let's move forward in time now. We've got Street Fighter Alpha Warrior's Dreams for the Game Boy Color. So this will work on Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance SP, but not the Micro or the DS. I'll bet you really needed that information. So this was converted by a UK developer called Crawfish, who I'm going to discuss a bit further later. I mean, having experienced Street Fighter 2 on the Game Boy, how much better can this possibly be? Let's take a look and see. Well, that's much better, and it feels a lot more like Street Fighter 2. You know, let's stack it up next to the arcade Street Fighter Alpha, which was a kind of prequel series. That's what this is based on, and we'll see how they compare. Okay, so it's still obvious which one the arcade is, but considering the very low power of the Game Boy Color, that's a very impressive, authentic conversion. The animation's very smooth. It feels like Street Fighter, even though you've only got 2 buttons instead of 6. So it's pretty good fun, and you know, a good effort by those guys. Anyway, that's kind of irrelevant now. I was just doing those for history. Along came the Game Boy Advance, and almost at launch, we had this bad boy, Street Fighter 2 Turbo Revival. That's a pretty mouthfulish name. Basically, it's Street Fighter 2 with all the bells and whistles from all the various editions that came out and a little bit more on top. Now, the Game Boy Advance still only has 4 buttons. Arcade Street Fighter 2 has 6, so if you're like a hardcore Street Fighter nerd, you're probably still not going to accept this as the real deal. But in my opinion, it's actually one of the premier home conversions of this game, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, it's pretty spot on in terms of, you know, the animation and the look and everything, as the SNES versions were. Let's stack them up next to each other, the arcade and the Game Boy Advance, and we'll see.
Hadouken! 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 Hadouken!
However, almost everything else about the game has been redone. All the presentation before and after the fight, they've changed some of the backgrounds. Although, to be honest, you do end up just wanting the old backgrounds back. But still, it's a nice touch. And my favourite part of all, they've revamped the special effect when you do a super move finish. So it just looks completely fucking awesome now. They've also added a kind of a survival kind of mode, but because everything's loading off the cartridge instead of discs, which we've been used to for quite a while, it's all really quick, so the new guys just jump in really quickly like this. So yeah, it's got the classic Street Fighter feel. It's the gameplay still feels bang up to date. It's brilliant for the bus. This conversion is great. Right. So you might think it's all over. You might wish it's all over. I know I do. But anyway, it's not over. There's more, because a lot later in the life of the Game Boy Advance, we had Street Fighter Alpha 3, which is a conversion of the third prequel for Street Fighter 2. This was a kind of everything, including the kitchen sink version of Street Fighter. It's got loads and loads of characters, loads of different ways to play and stuff. And although to the to the layperson it looks similar to Street Fighter 2, there's actually technically there's a bit more happening. So it looks like a much harder conversion job for the Game Boy Advance, but it was converted very ably by Crawfish, who also did the Street Fighter Alpha game for the Game Boy Color. It spent a long time, for whatever reason, in development hell, and it kept getting pushed back. And I actually ended up emailing them, because I'm a bit sad, to find out what had happened to it. And they emailed back really quickly and said, oh, it was going to be out in another couple of months. But when it arrived, it was worth the wait. At its core, it's got everything from the arcade, and it's been shrunk down really well. Let's just stack them up side by side and see. So yeah, you can see how close it is considering the limitations of the Game Boy Advance system. It's also got 3 extra characters who at the time weren't in any other version. They eventually appeared in the PSP version as well, but they're taken from Capcom vs SNK 2, incidentally. That's a bit of trivia for you. But just before this game came out, Crawfish, who did that brilliant conversion job, went out of business. And when they went out of business, they said that it was because big name clients had been behind with their invoice payments, and it got so bad that the company didn't have enough capital to keep its doors open, and they had to shut down. So they didn't say who it was, but you can't help but think it might have been Capcom who made Street Fighter, or Ubisoft who were publishing this, at least in Europe. Or maybe Nintendo themselves, I'm not sure, but it's a real shame. Apparently some of them went off and joined Climax Handheld. I had a job interview for Climax Handheld once, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. Apart from, it wasn't as bad as that Game Boy version of Street Fighter 2. That was worse. So there you have it. You probably didn't need to know, and I didn't have to tell you anything about these games, but I think you'll agree we've all learned something. Something not very useful, but something nonetheless. I'll see you later.